Have you ever wondered why, despite craving deep connection, you instinctually push the people you love the furthest away? You meet someone. The conversation flows. You feel understood for the first time in months, maybe years. And then, without warning, you withdraw. You stop answering messages. You create distance. You sabotage the very thing you were searching for. This is not weakness. This is not failure. This is the human condition operating exactly as Arthur Schopenhauer predicted it would in 1851. You are caught in what he called the hedgehog's dilemma, a psychological trap so fundamental that it shapes every relationship you will ever have. The closer you get to another person, the more you expose yourself to pain. And your mind, brilliant and protective, begins its retreat. What you are about to discover is not comfortable. Schopenhauer did not offer comfort. He offered truth. And the truth is this: you push people away because connection requires vulnerability, and vulnerability guarantees suffering. But there is a way through this. There is an optimal distance, and understanding why you retreat is the first step toward choosing your relationships consciously rather than letting your protective mechanisms choose for you. The fundamental conflict at the heart of human relationships is this: we are biologically and psychologically designed to need others, yet intimacy with others is the source of our greatest suffering. Schopenhauer understood this paradox better than perhaps any philosopher before or since. He recognized that human beings are trapped between two unbearable states. Isolation brings loneliness, boredom, and the crushing weight of our own thoughts. But proximity brings conflict, disappointment, and the inevitable pain of being truly known. We need warmth, but we cannot tolerate the heat. This is where the hedgehog's dilemma emerges as one of Schopenhauer's most penetrating psychological observations. In his work, Parerga and Paralipomena, he described a group of hedgehogs on a cold winter night. They huddled together for warmth, but as they drew closer, their spines began to prick one another. The pain forced them apart, yet the cold drove them back together. They repeated this cycle, moving closer and then retreating, until they discovered the optimal distance where they could share some warmth without causing each other unbearable pain. Schopenhauer wrote that this is precisely how human beings relate to one another. We are drawn together by need, separated by pain, and spend our entire lives oscillating between these two poles. The problem is not that you push people away. The problem is that you have not yet found your optimal distance. Every relationship you have ever damaged through withdrawal was not destroyed by your flaws. It was destroyed by an unconscious attempt to manage the fundamental tension between need and self-protection. You crave intimacy because loneliness is a form of death. But you fear intimacy because closeness means another person can see your inadequacy, judge your weakness, and ultimately abandon you. So you abandon them first. You create the rejection before it can be inflicted upon you. This is not cruelty. This is survival instinct operating in the realm of emotional connection. Schopenhauer saw relationships as battlegrounds where two wills collide. In his masterwork, The World as Will and Representation, he argued that every living being is driven by an insatiable will to exist, to assert itself, to dominate its environment. When two people enter a relationship, two wills meet, and because each will wants supremacy, conflict is inevitable. Love, Schopenhauer believed, is a temporary illusion created by nature to ensure reproduction. Once that biological imperative fades, the underlying conflict of wills resurfaces. This is why the initial passion of romance gives way to the grinding reality of coexistence. This is why you begin to notice flaws, feel suffocated, and start creating distance. Your will is reasserting itself, You are protecting your individual existence from being subsumed by another. The psychology of vulnerability is where Schopenhauer's philosophy becomes painfully personal. Why does closeness feel like danger? Because it is. When you allow someone to know you deeply, you give them the power to hurt you in ways that a stranger never could. A stranger can insult your appearance or question your intelligence, and these wounds are shallow. But someone who knows your secrets, your fears, your shame, can strike at the very core of your identity. They can confirm your worst suspicions about yourself. And this is why, as Schopenhauer observed, we guard our inner world with such ferocity. Schopenhauer spent much of his life alone. He never married. He had few close friends. And while many dismissed him as misanthropic, he understood something most people refuse to admit. Solitude is safer than connection. In solitude, you cannot be betrayed. You cannot be abandoned. You cannot be judged. The price of this safety is loneliness. But for Schopenhauer, loneliness was preferable to the inevitable suffering that accompanies intimacy. He wrote, "A man can be himself only so long as he is alone. And if he does not love solitude, he will not love freedom, for it is only when he is alone that he is really free." This is the insight that most people find unbearable. You push people away not because you are broken, but because you are wise. Your unconscious mind has calculated the risk of deep connection and decided the potential pain outweighs the temporary comfort. Every time you have withdrawn from a relationship that was becoming too intimate, you were protecting something precious, your sense of self. Schopenhauer argued that our individuality is the most valuable thing we possess. To lose ourselves in another person, to become dependent on their approval or presence, is to surrender our autonomy. And autonomy is the only true freedom we have. But here is where the dilemma deepens. If you protect yourself too completely, you become imprisoned in isolation. If you open yourself too fully, you become vulnerable to destruction. Schopenhauer recognized this as an unsolvable problem. There is no perfect solution. There is only the endless negotiation between need and self-preservation. The people who seem to have successful relationships have not solved this problem. They have simply found a distance that allows for enough warmth without too much pain. They have accepted that all intimacy comes with cost, and they have decided the cost is worth paying. You have not yet decided this. You are still operating from a defensive posture, assuming that the pain of connection will always exceed the pain of loneliness. To understand why you sabotage relationships requires understanding Schopenhauer's concept of the Principium Individuationis, the principle of individuation. This idea, borrowed from Kant and the Upanishads, suggests that our sense of being separate individuals is both necessary and illusory. We experience ourselves as distinct from others. We see our body, our thoughts, our desires as uniquely ours. But at a deeper level, according to Schopenhauer, all beings are manifestations of the same universal will. The boundaries between self and other are constructions of perception, not metaphysical reality. This creates a profound psychological tension. On one hand, we must maintain our individuality to function in the world. We must protect our interests, assert our needs, and defend our boundaries. On the other hand, our deepest longing is to transcend these boundaries, to merge with another, to escape the prison of the self. This is why love feels so intoxicating and so terrifying. In moments of genuine connection, the boundaries between self and other begin to dissolve. You feel understood. You feel seen. And for a brief time, the loneliness of individuation is suspended. But as the intensity fades, the boundaries reassert themselves. You remember that you are separate, You remember that this other person has their own will, their own agenda, their own capacity to hurt you, and you retreat. Schopenhauer believed that most human suffering stems from the conflict between our individual will and the wills of others. In relationships, this conflict becomes acute. Your partner wants something you cannot give. You want something they cannot provide. And because neither of you can fully surrender your will without losing yourself, you are locked in perpetual negotiation. Most people interpret this conflict as evidence that they have chosen the wrong partner. They believe that somewhere out there is a person who will perfectly align with their needs, who will never cause friction, who will complete them without requiring compromise. Schopenhauer would call this delusion the root of all romantic disappointment. The mechanism of defense that emerges from this conflict is the oscillation between boredom and suffering. When you are alone, you experience the boredom and restlessness of isolation. Your mind turns inward, and without external stimulation, you confront the emptiness of existence. This drives you toward connection. But when you are with others, especially in intimate relationships, you experience the suffering of friction, compromise, and vulnerability. This drives you back toward isolation. Schopenhauer observed that human beings are condemned to swing between these two states, never finding lasting peace in either. The person who pushes others away is simply someone who has decided that the suffering of connection exceeds the suffering of solitude. And they may be right. Friedrich Nietzsche, who began his philosophical career as a devoted follower of Schopenhauer before ultimately rejecting his pessimism, understood this dynamic through what he called the pathos of distance. Nietzsche argued that all genuine respect and admiration require distance. When we know someone too intimately, we inevitably see their weaknesses, their contradictions, their mundane humanity. The reverence we felt at a distance collapses into familiarity. And as the old saying goes, familiarity breeds contempt. Nietzsche believed that the aristocratic spirit, the noble character, instinctively maintains distance from others to preserve both their own dignity and the dignity of those around them. This is why you feel suffocated when someone gets too close. It is not that you do not care for them. It is that their proximity threatens the idealized image you have constructed, both of them and of yourself. When someone sees you at your worst, when they witness your pettiness, your insecurity, your weakness, the persona you have carefully crafted begins to crumble. And this is unbearable. So you create distance to restore the illusion. You disappear before they can fully see you. You reject them before they can reject the real you. Nietzsche would say, this is not weakness, but a form of self-preservation. You are protecting the necessary distance that allows for mutual respect. But here is where Schopenhauer's wisdom becomes practical. The goal is not to eliminate the need for distance. The goal is to find the optimal distance for each relationship. Not everyone deserves or requires the same level of intimacy. Your parents, your romantic partner, your closest friends, your colleagues, your acquaintances all exist at different distances from your core self. And the suffering you experience in relationships often comes from allowing people too close who should remain at a greater distance, or keeping people too far who deserve greater intimacy. Schopenhauer's hedgehogs eventually found their optimal distance. You must do the same. The practical philosophy here is to accept that all relationships require active management of distance. This is not cold or calculating. This is honest. When you feel yourself withdrawing, ask why. Are you protecting yourself from genuine danger, or are you running from vulnerability? When you feel suffocated, ask whether the other person is truly invading your boundaries, or whether you have unrealistic expectations of total autonomy. Schopenhauer taught that wisdom is accepting reality as it is, not as we wish it to be. The reality is that connection requires risk. The reality is that intimacy guarantees pain. The reality is that you will hurt others and be hurt in return. And the reality is that despite all of this, the alternative is to live in complete isolation, which brings its own unbearable suffering. The conclusion Schopenhauer arrived at, and the conclusion you must eventually reach, is that solitude is not a failure, but a strength. The person who can be comfortable alone is the person who can engage in relationships from a position of choice, rather than desperation. When you need others to validate your existence, to fill the emptiness inside you, to rescue you from yourself, you enter relationships as a beggar. And beggars have no power. They accept whatever scraps are offered. They tolerate mistreatment because they fear abandonment more than they fear suffering. Schopenhauer wrote, "Compassion is the basis of morality." But before you can truly offer compassion to others, you must first offer it to yourself. And self-compassion begins with accepting your need for solitude. You push people away because you have not yet learned to be alone. Paradoxically, the person who is comfortable in solitude is the person who can maintain healthy intimacy. They do not cling. They do not demand constant reassurance. They do not sacrifice their boundaries to avoid abandonment. They engage with others from a place of fullness rather than emptiness. And when the relationship becomes too painful, they have the strength to create distance without guilt or fear. This is the optimal distance Schopenhauer described. It is not a fixed measurement. It changes with each person and each season of life. But it always requires that you remain anchored in yourself. The modern world has made solitude more difficult than ever. You are surrounded by constant connectivity, endless notifications, the pressure to be always available, always responsive, always engaged. But this pseudo-connection is not intimacy. It is distraction. And it prevents you from developing the one relationship that matters most: the relationship with yourself. Schopenhauer believed that the person who cannot tolerate solitude is a person who has never truly met themselves. They are running from self-knowledge because self-knowledge is painful. It requires confronting your limitations, your mortality, your insignificance. But it is also the only path to genuine freedom. So the call is this: stop apologizing for your need for distance. Stop believing that your tendency to withdraw is evidence of brokenness. It is evidence of self-awareness. You have recognized what most people refuse to see: that intimacy is dangerous, that vulnerability guarantees pain, that all relationships eventually disappoint. But instead of accepting this with Schopenhauerian resignation, you have been fighting it. You have been trying to find a relationship that does not require distance, a person who will never hurt you, a connection that does not demand compromise. And this is why you keep failing. You are chasing an illusion. Accept the hedgehog's dilemma. Accept that warmth comes with spines. Accept that you will hurt others and be hurt in return. And then, from this acceptance, choose your relationships consciously. Decide who deserves your intimacy. Decide what level of pain you are willing to endure for what level of connection. And most importantly, decide that your solitude is not loneliness, but sanctuary. As Schopenhauer wrote, "A man can be himself only so long as he is alone." In solitude, you discover who you are beneath the masks you wear for others. In solitude, you build the strength to engage with the world without losing yourself in it. If this resonated with you, take one action today. Identify one relationship where you have been either too distant or too close. Adjust the distance. Have the conversation. Set the boundary. Or take the risk. And if you want to continue exploring the philosophy of human nature, subscribe to Drawn Psyche. We translate the most difficult truths into practical wisdom you can use immediately. Remember, suffering is inevitable, but how you respond to it is your choice.